Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me in our last kind of webinar for the series on independent clinic management. So we've heard from Summer Siddiqui at Vale Prosthetics and Orthotics out of Colleyville, Texas. She's been around for a year. So you can learn more about that on our previous webinar. We also had Ben Wright on, who has also got a few clinics in the Texas area, and he's just getting started. And we'll have Mark Hopkins from Dankmeyer Prosthetics and Orthotics on in a second, and he'll share more about the Dankmeyer history. They've been around for 70 years, another independent clinic with a number of locations in the Maryland area. And the goal, again, is just to kind of share some insights on what it takes to run a successful clinic, some trials and tribulations from those that have just started out, which, again, you can watch on YouTube on the previous webinars, as well as learning from those that have been around the block for a while and what has been successful for them. If there's any questions, comments, feel free to add them in. But you can find out more about Calibration Marketing. I'm the owner and chief marketing officer. You can go to calibration.marketing online. But without further ado, I'm going to add in Mark Hopkins. And we won't read that whole big list of great accomplishments, but if you could just kind of walk us through your story and how you got into O&P.
Sure, happy to do so. Thanks for having me on, Linda. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. So you can read the bio if you're zoomed in here. I was a physical therapist, and that was back in the 90s when it was easier to get into physical therapy because it was a bachelor's degree. And so I was pretty young, just 22 when I started practicing. So, and I was looking for a job, had been a student at Johns Hopkins, became a staff physical therapist, had an interest in working with folks with limb loss. Nobody else really wanted to do it. That was, back in the time when you would sort of pick and choose what you wanted to do in physical therapy. It was really easy to do that. And so the physical medicine and rehab department said, well, we'd love to have you do that. And I was then interested in prosthetics. So they said, well, if you want to go off and become a prosthetist, we'd love to have you come back. And we'll pay part of your tuition, which, at that age, I was like, okay. Nothing else to do. No, not married, no kids, didn't own a house, didn't have all those commitments. So I went off to Northwestern, came back, and spent the next, 15 years doing both physical therapy and prosthetics and orthotics, working at Dankmeyer with Charles.
Okay.
So I did, at the time, Charles was writing with NCOPE, the basic setup for residency. So he likes to joke that I was the first resident. So he put me through the paces in the residency. And the goal back then was with Hopkins was to try to establish an O&P practice, fully integrated into the medical institution. So it was the idea of multidisciplinary care, which we still, we strive for all the time. But it's really difficult to do because the marketplace is fragmented.
Yeah, boy.
That's a challenge. So even back in the 90s, even with, high hopes and lots of education. I mean, that's how I got my MBA, because they asked me to write up a business plan for how the institution would do an O&P program. How would you run the money, marketing? And I didn't know how to do that. So it was a certificate program, and then it was a master's of science. And by the time I got done, they had ramped it up to an MBA. And so that's how I got my MBA. So I'm a PT, a certified prosthetist and orthotist, and I have my MBA from Hopkins in healthcare administration, mostly out of just interest and night school and doing it, bit by bit.
Yeah. Just a few accomplishments.
It was all along the way. It was very organic. I didn't set out to become a prosthetist. I mean, PT school was very much an extension of my high school experience, and both my parents worked for Delaware. So it was just like a natural life, no master plan.
Gotcha. Well, it certainly all worked out. And as we kind of unravel the onion or the ball of yarn, I'm going to bring this up so we can all raise our celebratory glasses of coffee or seltzer. You guys just celebrated 70 years, and obviously you have not been around for all of it.
No.
But you've been around for a tremendous amount of it. And so for those that can read this, and it'll be visible better later on, just some facts on how far Dankmeyer has come. That when it was originally founded, it was, as you said, founded by Charles Dankmeyer, who himself was a Bologna amputee. And that was in 1954, which was before you even needed a bachelor's to practice. And then eventually, obviously, we needed the MBA, which has only been, a decade or so?
The master's degree? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been very long.
Yeah, not even. It was before Medicare was a thing, which started roughly 10 years after. And before AOPA became AOPA, and primarily was originally the Orthopedic Alliance and Limb Manufacturer Association. So there's been a tremendous amount of change in the last 70 years. And it would be tremendous for me to learn, what do you know from when you first started at Dankmeyer? How were things, what areas of focus were there? What was happening at the time? And what have you seen in terms of change in the last 20, 30 years of how things have shifted in terms of just the way that people practice and how you guys have grown and succeeded?
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack for sure. I mean, I think the first thing was when I started at Dankmeyer, it was because Charles offered me the opportunity to do it right. I had decided to go off to become a prosthetist, but didn't really have a plan. Again, I was just young, and I was sort of inspired to pick that extra piece of clinical practice up. But he reminded me, you could do this a couple ways, and one of them's probably not the best way. So you should probably pick a place to go learn how to do prosthetics, which would be in a formal residency.
Sure.
So he sort of instilled in me the idea that there's a way to do this that's right, that's the best way.
Do some of those things carry over to today still?
Oh, for sure, absolutely. The
Okay.
multidisciplinary care. That the way I met him was in Johns Hopkins, what was called at the time the Limb Prostheses Clinic, which was run by orthopedic surgery. And so the orthopedic surgeons would run the clinic. There were 3 of them. Local prosthetists would come in. The patients would come in, and they would do this on a weekly basis. There was a physical therapy component. And so multidisciplinary care was an extension of sort of post-World War II realization that there was a good way to take care of patients with limb loss. And Mr. Dankmeyer Sr. was one of those first prosthetists went off to these training programs, came back to Baltimore where he was working as a prosthetist and met with folks at Hopkins and University of Maryland, said, we should really do this. We should really have a multidisciplinary team that meets with the patients. We should prescribe prostheses and therapies and do revision surgeries or whatever's necessary, medicine, to make it so that the patients achieve the greatest possible success with their artificial limbs.
Yeah.
And so that was the very start of it. So, and I think that's key to understanding why we have lasted 70 years, because that was from the very get-go.
Yeah.
At least in my experience, with the way Mr. Dankmeyer Sr. and then Charles Jr., his son, just felt like there was a way to do this that was best for the client, that also was really good for the practitioner and for the company.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's, I think not that things have seemingly moved away from that, but I think a lot of these newer practices that are opening up, that's what they're striving for as well. And we heard the same thing from Summer at Vale, that, your why has to be your patients. And which I think goes without saying, right? Like, why else would you do it? It's certainly not for, boku bucks. It's to provide that exceptional level of care to those that need it. I think we're all kind of struggling just due to insurance limitations and a lot of other things, but I know there's a lot of conversation around that multidisciplinary care and just making sure that all the right people are there, all the right viewpoints and levels of support, but it's not always possible, depending on where you are. And yeah,
it can be a real challenge, and there are more ways than ever to be able to do it. I mean, remote work,
yeah,
digital systems. I mean, we can go off on where things are heading, but even back in the 50s, it was still possible to get people together in a room and talk face to face with each other, including the patient at the center of the discussion,
yeah,
and make a plan that you would then follow up on and ensure that it was enacted successfully. And I still think there's a lot of value in it, whether it's like this, right? I mean, we could do
right.
a virtual piece, and I was looking at the calendar this morning. We have some virtual meetings with the VA clinic out in Western Maryland,
Okay.
because that's the easiest way in a rural community to make that idea of multidisciplinary care work. You do a virtual setup, and there's ways to do it. Come to the prosthetist office if you're closer there, or go to the VA medical center if you're closer there. I think the digital tools allow it to be possible, but you just have to leverage them. You have to be comfortable with that idea of making
Yeah,
that a little extra effort to find a
sure.
way to do the multidisciplinary care on a regular basis.
So I guess touching on that, how have you seen things change from when you started? For better, worse, in the middle, in terms of where the industry is heading and all the new tools that are out there? Or is it sometimes like it's just spaghetti on a wall, and everybody's grasping at everything? There's obviously some successes in there somewhere,
Yeah.
but is it a bit hodgepodge? And what have you seen as the tools that have made things easier and allowed for continued success in what you do across multiple locations?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of technologies that are producing fantastic results for patients, and we can go off on tangents about prosthetic feet and orthotic components that are lighter and stronger and more durable and produce better outcomes. And there's just a ton of that, and that gets a lot of hype. There's
Sure.
digital workflow, which we can talk about, which is, and I think when I talk about digital workflow, I mean everything from the electronic medical record, which is not necessarily a new idea, but there are some changes there to telehealth, but then also scanning body segments, computer assisted design and manufacturing, and then out to what really gets all the interest, which is 3D printing or additive
Sure.
manufacturing. There's a lot there too. But I think there's still a place for the connection with your colleagues and
Yeah.
and providing that long term. These are folks who are going to wear a prosthesis for a very long time, or an orthosis. And in our practice is largely chronic users of devices. We don't have a big part of our practice that's sports medicine or short term trauma. It's mostly folks who are going to wear a device forever. So you're talking about a forever life plan. And so if
Yeah.
you're really going to have long term benefits for patients, you're going to have to reach out to them on a regular basis and bring them back in and look at advancing technology, tune-ups, adjustments to their care plan, and I think that's a big part of the change over time, is that we've been able to keep that multidisciplinary idea alive for 70 years. That's where we started. I think that's where we are still pushing to do that on a regular basis. I just left the Hopkins Osseointegration Clinic. Talk about advancing technology,
Sure.
which is
Yeah.
surgical. It's so nice to have the surgeons re-interested in amputation care.
Oh, interesting.
And that's a new thing. It targeted motor reinnervation, all types of other neurogenic surgeries to relieve pain, and then revisions just to make the residual limb, if you're going to fit them with a socket, work better.
Sure.
And then osseointegration is just icing on the cake, and there is so much more there
Yeah.
to link up with these advanced components. And I'm just really hitting on the prosthetic piece because it's top of mind.
Sure.
But there's the same approach can be applied to orthotics.
Yeah. And we had somebody ask a question in terms of multidisciplinary team. What, in your mind, what does that include? Does it include pain management and mental health, or what does that mean to you? And
Oh,
Dave?
absolutely. It includes those things. And the team can be very, very broad. The broader the resource, the better, in my opinion. It can include all
Sure.
sorts of tangential things that you might not even think about. Like we have a big connection with rehabilitation psychology at
Okay.
Johns
Oh,
Hopkins.
great.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And they help with some of this activation of patients, which is something we talk about in rehabilitation medicine, which goes to sort of motivation, right? Um,
Hmm.
how do you get the patient to understand what the expectations are, what they're going to have to give to their rehabilitation to achieve the outcomes which they want to achieve? So it's a lot of there's a psychology there, just like there would be in
Of
sports
course.
psychology.
Yeah.
But I think the team can be very, very broad. I mean, you can boil it down for certain things to say that it's often a physician, a physical or occupational therapist, and the certified prosthetist and orthotist, depending on the patient population.
Sure.
But there are a multitude of people that should be available to you if you're going to do the job well.
How have you been able to bring those various people together? Obviously, maybe you have some of them on staff,
Hmm.
but how are you pulling all of these individuals together that maybe I keep talking about the lady across the street from me who is now being fit and going through just first time getting fit with partial hands and a partial foot.
Mm.
And her clinic does not have an OT on staff. So I'm trying to help them figure out how do we find somebody that's close to her home, not necessarily the clinic because that's a bit of a drive. How have you been able to kind of pull the right people together into these cases and conversations? Is it just years of relationships?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was what was instilled in me from the very beginning of my work with Dankmeyer was that was the model that was the
Mm,
ideal, and that you should have, in the back of your mind, you should be seeking the ideal. This is the kind of foundational principle thing, right? You have to have a purpose. If your purpose is to achieve the best possible outcome for your customers, then you're
yeah.
always looking for those opportunities to collaborate. And they are challenging. We have offices in rural areas, we have offices in metropolitan areas, and the resources are just different. But that doesn't mean that we haven't made efforts to be creative and find ways to connect people with the resources that are necessary. And they come and go.
Sure.
We may have a support group in a community for a period of time, and then it dwindles. Then we have to go back out and find another group of people to start it back up again. Same thing with relationships. But we are in this for the long run.
Hmm.
And for us to be successful, our patients have to be successful. So there's a win-win-win always
Yeah.
that we're
Yeah.
looking for. So I think it really is about a commitment to doing things in a certain way and realizing that nothing's perfect.
Hmm.
It's just life, and you can't change the way things happen. You just have to change your perspective on how you deal with what happens. So
Sure. No,
there's something there to be said for just loving change
yeah, being comfortable with it.
and being comfortable with it. Yeah.
So when Dankmeyer started out, was it one primary location in the Baltimore area? How did the growth happen? And, how have you been able to maintain it?
So that's a great question. And I recently we ended a fiscal year. We end in October, end of
Mm.
September, and we're talking about new strategic planning going forward. And we have got a new plan. That's my hard hat over there on the
Oh,
calendar.
okay. I was gonna,
For,
yeah.
both for renovations for our space here in Linthicum, but also just for building up our business over a long run for a strategic plan. And I
Awesome.
found the original picture of the first Dankmeyer office,
Mm.
which I can share with you. Um, but it was a storefront in Baltimore
Okay.
City, and it was 2 stories with a basement, and the shop was in the basement, and there were probably 5 employees. Mr. Dankmeyer was employed by another larger company, and he
Okay.
left for good reasons. Let's just say
Sure.
that he left for good reasons and started out with a single location in Baltimore City in 1954. I even found the original 1954 ABC certificate
Oh, wild.
in the back the other day. ABC came for a visit, and I showed it to them. And so he went off to be trained in the multidisciplinary model,
Uh-huh.
found collaborators at Hopkins and University of Maryland, had a 2-story row house storefront in Baltimore City,
Mm.
became ABC certified. I mean, he just did it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
He set himself up for success for the long run. And then that office grew. There was a larger space in Baltimore City. And then this is great. This is, any great origin story has a little bit of mythology to it.
Sure.
So when we opened up our satellite offices, for example, the one in Western Maryland, there's stories of Mr. Dankmeyer, who was a bilateral below the knee amputee,
Mm-hmm.
going to Cumberland, renting a hotel room to see a patient, to fit them, take the cast and the measurements, driving back to Baltimore, making a leg, and then going back up to Cumberland to provide the prosthesis.
Mm.
Back in, which would have been 60s maybe,
Yeah.
something like this, before we had an office out there. And the same thing going east before the Bay Bridge was up. He would take the ferry over.
Oh, wow.
Charles Dankmeyer Jr. would take the ferry over to collaborate with people on the Eastern Shore to see patients who were underserved, bring
Mm.
everything back to Baltimore. And then we opened offices because we had a collaboration with people in the community who wanted us to be there.
Yeah.
So it was all organic. It was, where does somebody want us to put a shingle up?
Yeah.
And to make it easier than us running back and forth, hundreds of miles in either direction.
Yeah.
And that's just been the pattern. That's why we have a small space on the campus of Johns Hopkins, because they
Mm.
asked us to have a small space on campus. And
That's
so we did
great.
so. It was by being asked to be in the community, and I think
Yeah.
being really close to the community is key to long-term success.
Oh, yeah. That's huge. I got goosebumps when you were telling that
Yeah.
story.
There are
Um,
some other mythological stories there about flying out to Western Maryland in a small plane to do the work.
oh,
And, anyway, so
yeah.
there's this
No.
independent streak at Dankmeyer of the original owner, Mr. Dankmeyer Sr., working for somebody else and
Mm.
then breaking off to start his own company, and us being independent for 70 years,
Yeah.
and competing in the marketplace against small and other large competitors for a
Yeah.
very, very long time, and still being able to do things in a way that we can feel good about.
Yeah. No, I mean it's a huge feat, especially as there continues to be consolidation in the market for good, bad, and different reasons. It's just, it's the path for some people. And
Sure.
I think in all of our heart of hearts, the goal is to provide exceptional care. Does it always pan out that way every single time? Unfortunately, no. But I think there wouldn't be a desire to either consolidate or acquire, or if it at the heart of it wasn't to be able to allow for more users to have access to the technology that's out there. Obviously, there's a lot of other roadblocks that people continue to work on through insurance and making sure that these devices so everybody can movement, and so everybody gets what they need. But still a lot of work to do, but you guys have certainly achieved a tremendous amount still being in it as an independent practice with multiple locations in the community, like you said, and, providing this exceptional level of care. I guess we talked a little bit about in terms of one of the things that you do weekly is these weekly all staff huddles. And there's a lot of turnover in staff as it applies anywhere. Doesn't necessarily mean O&P, but in general. And I really feel like that's probably one of the things that continues to keep your groups together in terms of just making sure that everybody's on the same page. And we're going into the back end of the year now. What are some of the things that you feel like have helped keep some of the employees that you have for decades, in some cases, like yourself and others, that have just kept them in the family? What are some of the things that you're doing outside the staff huddles to make sure that everybody's on the same page?
Yeah, we have always felt like change is something you just have to be comfortable with, and
Mm.
I think having a residency, for since there were residencies, brings fresh information, fresh ideas in. We do a lot of collaboration with our multidisciplinary team, colleagues. That brings in fresh ideas. dabbling in technology when we can. I think that people really embrace the idea of the new and the different and are curious about it, and that keeps things fresh. But
Hmm.
really, during you talked about the huddles because that's something that is. It's I smile because I do this Monday mornings at 8:15 every week, and it's a bit of a struggle to get myself together and
Sure.
come up with something that's interesting to say on a Monday morning every week.
Hmm.
And they started during the pandemic because we
Oh,
had,
interesting. Okay.
yeah, we would do them every day for a little while just because things were changing so fast,
Yeah.
especially in March of 2020 or whatever when
Yeah.
we didn't have any idea what we were doing. But then when we settled down, we tried to pull them back, and people said, "No, I really like the Hollywood Squares
Mm.
Zoom picture of everybody's face. I don't get to see everybody because we have other offices, or I'm at a clinic, or I'm out today." But there was a way for everybody to check in, see somebody else's smiling face, and
Yeah.
we just realized that there was a culture at Dankmeyer that was really about um, seeing the customer not only as the end user of our device or our colleague who's making the referral, but
Hmm.
the internal customer, right?
Yeah.
Which was the person I work with every single day. I mean, sometimes I spend more time here at work than I do at home, much to my long-suffering wife's chagrin. But so why wouldn't I spend
Hmm.
a, a sort of an inordinate amount of my time concerning myself with how much my fellow coworker was liking their job or
Yeah.
loving their job if you can get there. So it just the pandemic, the huddle meetings, the regular reaching out to each other with support just drove that home. And then
Hmm.
we sort of did some introspection and figured that that's the key. We really
Yeah.
do need to have a team of people that feel like their work matters, that
Yeah.
that they know what they're supposed to do every day and how to do it well. And if they don't do it well, someone will tell them how to do it well. And that
Yeah.
they have a connection with the other people on the team. If you don't have those three things, people suffer. And we were just lucky, I suppose, in the early years because that's just the way the business was built. Now it's top of mind,
Hmm.
and we're doing it intentionally, and we're doing a lot of learning and reading. There's some books over there on the shelf by my hard hat that, we're actually physically doing some of this purposeful discussion about you should be able to love maybe just 20% of your job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's some research out there that suggests if you can love 20% of what you do, you can tolerate the other 80%.
Hmm.
But
Interesting.
if you don't have that, if you're not even making an attempt to have
Yeah.
that, you're going to have a turnover problem, and turnover is just wasted money.
Hmm.
Let alone what effect it has on your customers, right?
Right.
Customers don't like that, especially in a business where you have a lifelong relationship with a user of a chronically used device like a prosthesis or orthosis. They don't
Hmm.
want John to leave.
Right.
Whether
Yeah.
John is the front desk person, the funding person, or their practitioner, they rely on John or Betty
Yeah.
or whoever to be their touch point at Dankmeyer. Mark knows what I need. Every time I call in and I see that I need a new Hujuwat because it worn out, I know what Hujuwat it is.
Hmm.
That's just
Right.
a touch. And there's always going to be a place. This is the optimism I have, Linda, about the whole consolidation thing. There's
Mm.
always going to be a place for small business.
Yeah.
For a touch, I just I just firmly believe that. It may mean we become smaller and boutique-ish,
Hmm.
or maybe we can find the secret sauce and we can grow into an independent practice that still keeps that personal touch. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that large businesses or growing businesses lose the ability to stay connected to their customers because there are big businesses that do that.
Sure.
Obviously,
Yeah.
right? That's why people love Starbucks and Amazon,
Hmm.
right? They found the secret sauce. But I still think there's a place for folks to be independent practitioners, even sole proprietors, and do a good job. Be
Well,
happy, take care of their patients.
yeah, and just like you said, in terms of taking care of your staff, you also track patient satisfaction through your systems and making sure that that's tracking where it needs to be. Is that I'm assuming that's just part of one of the tools that you use across your three locations to see how successful you are in general.
Yeah, we take it very seriously. We fully use the tools that are baked into our OP, electronic medical record, and
Okay.
uh, we want to expand that because it only surveys customers who use the devices. So it doesn't tell us anything about referral sources, which would be more of a CRM system.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell us anything about how our colleagues are feeling. So we are having to do separate surveys of that. But we had, as I mentioned, we had ABC here the other day, and we've done such a push on our patient satisfaction surveying that our aggregate's about 40%, which is unheard of. And we have a few practitioners who have taken it so much to heart that they're 100% on their return rate for patient satisfaction surveys, which is crazy. It's just insane that they've done so much work to make sure that they ask the customer in a formal way to say, well, what do you think of your experience?
Right.
And everybody replies, some not perfect.
Sure.
I'm not saying our results are our scores, but our scores are fairly high. But more importantly, it's the return rate. If you don't ask, you're just never going to know.
No, I agreed. As we kind of wrap things up here, I want to make sure that we hit on the various services that you do offer at Dankmeyer. You mentioned both prosthetics and orthotics and osseointegration. What types of patients are you supporting? Is it just, anyone that needs any kind of level of support when it comes to those areas? Are there key patient populations?
Yeah, we're a long-standing O&P company that's built its reputation on being able to do pretty much anything in orthotics and prosthetics. We still have our own shop with technicians. It's something that not everybody has, so we can do on-site repairs and fabrication, and that's a real connection between the clinical and the technical side, face-to-face on a near regular basis. We have a big pediatric population.
Okay.
Through our work with Kennedy Krieger and the Children's League and other groups in Maryland. We've always historically done upper limb prostheses back since the beginning of Dankmeyer. Upper limb prostheses were a focus of the company.
Great.
So, and we have great collaborators on all of that. So, we're happy to see we pretty much do anything in the custom world of orthotics and prosthetics. No physical therapy, occupational therapy services, or durable medical equipment. And there's some things we shy away from that are just better done by other groups, like shoes and diabetic foot products and those kinds of things. Compression garments. We don't do mastectomy, but generally, sort of the core O&P, we do that work and we do it well.
No, and again, in 3 different locations, right? Easton, Baltimore, and Vale.
Yeah, and we have a small location on the campus of Johns Hopkins. So 3 offices, 4 locations. Yep.
Yeah. No, and expanding.
That's
hard hat. Yep, hard hat. No, that's. I'm glad you were able to share more about Dankmeyer, the team. People can find out more on dankmeyer.com. They can link in with you and learn more about the entire team and all of what you guys do on a variety of social channels. But I wanted to thank you for joining me today and carving out some time in your super busy day. And we have one more webinar left this year, which is super exciting, number 20, which I can't even believe. I don't know. I just keep finding ways to talk to new people. But I'll have my friends from Brain Robotics joining me on December 3rd after Thanksgiving. So hopefully sharing join us then. But Mark, thank you for hopping on today and sharing more.
Thank you, Linda. It's been great. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no. So everybody, you can continue to drop in comments on LinkedIn or on YouTube once this goes up, but have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Okay. All right. That's all she wrote.